작가님, 이거 영국문화원은
네.
영국 대사관 부속기관이에요?
아니요, 독립된 기관이고 우리나라에 40년 전에 들어왔는데 전 세계 110개국에 영국 문화원이 퍼져 있어요.
오늘 게스트 롤란 데이비스 영어문화 원장이신데 홈페이지 보니까 문화 사업이 굉장히 다양하더라고요.
특히 영어 교육의 힘을 굉장히 많이 쏟는 것 같아요.
문화 원장님께서 직접 영어 교사였다면서요?
그래서 평소에 영어가 소통의 기술이라고 말씀하시더라고요.
서로 다른 나라 사람들이 소통할 수 있는 게 그 영어라는 국제 공용어가 있기 때문이잖아요. 그러니까 그런 의미에서 보면은 영어 공부하는 게 소통의 기술이다 이런 것도 좀 맞는 것 같아요.
그러면 문화원의 대표 사업이 뭐예요?
교육이랑 문화랑 스포츠랑 전방위적으로 하고 있어요. 프로그램이 굉장히 많더라고요.
스포츠는 축구도 있나요? 영국이 축구 종주국이잖아요.
네, 맞아요. 프리미어 리그 지도자 교실이 있어요. 한국이랑 영국 유학생 교류하고 지원해주는 그런 프로그램도 있어요.
지원을 해준다고요? 금전적으로?
안 해줄 것 같아서 실제로 유학비도 정말 지원을 해주고 그다음에 뭐 한국하고 영국 학생들을 서로 교류하게 해주는 지원 사업도 있고 여러 가지를 하고 있어요.
더 있어요. 그 사회적 기업 육성 프로젝트도 있고 청년 기업가 캠프도 있고 정말 많더라고요.
다 들을 수는 없을 것 같고 주요 사업 몇 가지만 좀 들으면 어떨까요?
한 두 가지 정도 꼽을 수 있을 것 같아요. 하나는 한국하고 영국 학생들 교류하는 거, 그거 얘기하고 또 하나는 사회적 기업 육성 프로젝트 같은 경우는 청년 창업할 수 있는 그런 기회를 마련해 주는 거더라고요. 좀 관심이 많이 가요.
그렇죠. 청년 실업 문제는 우리나라에서도 큰 사회적 이슈가 되고 있으니까 영국 문화원에 그런 프로그램이 있다는 게 솔깃하네요. 나중에 좀 여쭤볼게요.
그리고 문화원에서는 특강도 자주 연다고 들었는데요. 얼마 전에 박 PD님이랑 촬영도 다녀왔었어요.
영국이 한국을 말하다라는 주제로 세미나를 열렸는데 진행하신 분이 아리랑에서 비즈라인 진행하시는 분 앤드루 쌤은 기자가시더라고요.
어때요?
뭐가요?
어떠시냐고요?
당연히 재밌었어요. 사람들 반응도 좋았고 분위기 되게 좋더라고요.
그런 거는 어떻게 알아봐요? 재미있는 거 참 많을 것 같은데.
일단 홈페이지를 자주 들어가면 피가 되고 살이 되는 정보가 많이 있고 가을까지도 지금 이 특강이 시리즈로 계속 연결돼 있더라고요.
근데 지금 에딘버러 페스티벌 하고 있는 중 아닌가요?
에딘버러 페스티벌 그거 유명한 거 아니에요?
맞아요.
네, 이게 영국에서 매년 열리는 아주 세계적인 문화예술 축제인데 올해는 고 백남준 선생님 작품이 아주 메인 테마로 전시된다고 하더라고요. 되게 뿌듯한 것 같아요.
백남준 선생님 좋네요. 근데 이게 영국 문화원하고 무슨 상관이 있어요?
그러니까 문화원 홈페이지에서 보기는 했는데 문화원이 뭐 어느 정도 이렇게 세팅을 해줬는지 이런 거를 원장 선생님한테 직접 들으면 좋을 것 같아요.
백남준 선생님이야 뭐 이미 워낙 유명하신 분이고 영국에서 우리나라 예술가들의 그 평가랄까? 그런 것도 한번 여쭤보면 좋을 것 같아요.
그럴게요. 뭐 문화 이야기는 해도 해도 끝이 없고 워낙 즐거우니까 오픈 마인드로 다방면으로 한번 접근하면 좋을 것 같아요. 키워드 많이 나온 것 같으니까 한번 적어볼게요. 키워드 주시죠. 네.
저는 그 소통의 기술에 대해 듣고 싶어요.
오케이. 또 뭐가 있을까요?
저는 그 영국 문화원이 한국에서 하는 그 한국에서의 교류 사업에 대해서 좀 듣고 싶어요.
하나만 더 할까요?
전 그 에딘버러 페스티벌
에딘버러.
아까 이야기했던 거요.
이 정도면 될 것 같아요. 그렇죠? 네, 문화 원장님의 대화. From Shakespeare, the Beatles, David Beckham, and One Direction. They're all British, and we find traces of British culture in all corners of the world, including Korea. This week on Heart to Heart, we have Mr. Roland Davies, who is Director of the British Council in Korea. Mr. Davies, thank you so much for joining us.
It's very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for coming. So, how have you been spending your summer? How's the British Council been spending this very hot, muggy summer in Korea?
Well, the last few weeks, obviously, I've spent under an umbrella, like most people. But we run our programs all through the year, and summer is no exception. At the moment, a lot of our work is in relation to English language teaching, so we're running summer intensives to give people a good excuse to stay out of the rain. And we've got a number of other programs in the area of higher education. We've got stuff going on in social enterprise. We have work going on with our schools networks. So pretty much the full range of programs. I mean, things do slow down a little bit in the summer, people on holiday. But yeah, we're pretty much keeping going.
Have you been able to go on holiday yet?
No, I'm a little bit busy at the moment,
Okay.
so maybe later in the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the British Council has a very long history in Korea. From various sources, the years seem to change, but
Yeah.
I think 1973 is
73 is correct,
is
yeah.
the most often quoted.
Which makes it our 40th anniversary
Right.
this year in Korea.
And did you have any special events to commemorate?
We'll be doing some stuff later in the year, running some competitions and some events in relation to that anniversary. The other anniversary is that it's 130 years since the UK and Korea opened diplomatic relations, so that's another anniversary this year. And we're very pleased, as people now know, I think, that President Park is going to visit the UK in November. So that's one way of celebrating that relationship.
Right. The British Council is one of the largest cultural councils, I hear, and you've got offices all around the world. Can you give us a sense of the scale of your organization?
We have offices we're represented in about, well, it is 110 countries all around the world. We have, I think, about 250, 260 offices in those 110 countries, and about 7,500 staff. So I think of similar kinds of organizations, for example, the French Institute or the Goethe Institute. We are, I think, the largest of this type of organization. And we've been doing it for a very long time. We started out I think it's about 77 years ago. So we've been in what we call the cultural relations business for a very long time, yes.
So a long tradition in that. Where was the first one set up?
I'm going to fail this question because I can't remember if it was either in Greece or in Egypt. I can't remember which one. And it was set up in the 1930s.
Okay.
And at the time, I think it was in part as a response to, obviously that was a very turbulent period in European history. And there was Nazi propaganda being pushed out into other countries, and we started, in a sense, as a propaganda organisation, of putting across our message. But we chose to do that through culture. So we were, Shakespeare was our main weapon at the time.
And a very powerful weapon that you have.
It certainly is, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I imagine the focus has changed. I mean, you still use Shakespeare, of course, but from propaganda, maybe more now you have language programs.
I think the major change that you can observe over the time is that we began, I mean, at the beginning perhaps it was about propaganda, and then it becomes something like cultural promotion, where we're saying, look at our theatre, look at our music, our orchestras, our art, and enjoy it, and you share that with the world. And later on, it developed into something that we now call cultural relations, and that's really about the emphasis there is on relations, on relationships, on building trust between the UK and people of other countries. And I think the main feature of that, you see, is that it doesn't go in one direction. It is really trying to build an exchange and understanding, and where there is mutual benefit. So both sides draw something from the relationship, because as we know from any relationship, if it's too one-sided, then it doesn't last. So for there to be sustainability in cultural relationships, you have to have this two-way flow and this mutual benefit.
Well, let's go back to English language courses, because that is one of the most popular programs that you offer at the British Council. But I hear that the Council also has quite a unique teaching method, or a unique sort of approach. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think I'd probably hesitate to call it unique, because I think it's what we broadly do is what's called a communicative approach, and that's placing emphasis on the use of the language. So what's the language for? It's to enable people to communicate, to do business, to gain access to education, to travel. So that's not unique to us. I suppose what we would say is that we've been doing it that way. We've been developing our approach to that, and we're quite good at it. And we put a lot of effort, a lot of resource into seeing how we can do it better. So that means whether it's training for teachers or keeping ourselves updated about what's happening in the theoretical or the academic areas, using the latest materials, these days incorporating a lot of digital into what we do. So perhaps not unique, but I think we, can I say that we do it uniquely well?
You may, of course.
Exactly.
So imagine, I mean, compared to the hundreds and thousands of language institutes that are in Korea offering similar sort of language services, you use language or English as a tool to learn more about the UK? And
not necessarily. We don't focus it on the UK particularly. We recognise that many people, in fact the majority of language speakers in the world at the moment are probably not mother tongue speakers, and that they're speaking English to other non-mother tongue speakers. So that could be a Korean businessman talking to a Brazilian businessman or a Russian businessman. And the element of culture, while it's important and it's of interest to people, is not really how we define what we do. So it's not we are purveying British culture and British English. Really we see English these days as a life skill for people to access educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and we have to pay attention to that, but really pay attention to what people want to do with the language, and ultimately that's to be able to speak, to read, to write, to listen, to be able to communicate with people. And I think what's distinct about that, perhaps in this context in Korea, is that English is often treated as an academic discipline where you study it, you learn about the grammar, you memorize vocabulary, you forget it 2 days later, but as long as you got through the test, then it's okay. So we really don't subscribe to that approach.
Okay. Well, in addition to English courses, the British Council offers various programs, and we're going to take a look at how are they working to advance mutual understanding between the UK and Korea.
The British Council was established in 1973 to help facilitate cultural exchanges between Korea and the UK. The Council offers a variety of services. You can find out about studying in the UK, learn English, or take the IELTS test. The Council also has programs on art, culture, and even climate change. The British Council also hosts seminars on numerous topics, which is open to the public. Meanwhile, the Language Institute attracts over 500,000 visitors yearly, from grade school students to corporate managers and executives. The British Council is in charge of the two countries' cooperation on culture and the arts, education, and more. We hope the Council continues to expand and help people connect throughout the world.
When I used to visit the British Council very often in the early 90s, it was one of the few places where you can access English books and English movies. Now, of course, it's a very different environment. How does the British Council stay competitive?
Well, you're right. I mean, competition is something that we have to think about very carefully, and it's an extremely competitive environment. There are lots of schools, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, what we do is try to maintain our focus on what it is that we think students want and how we can help them to get there. So our focus very much is on people who have a serious motivation to learn English, they can apply themselves a little bit and they're willing to learn, then that's what we can really help with. And in terms of our differentiation, I think it's always going to be about the quality of our teaching staff, the amount of resources that we invest in supporting them as teachers, developing them as teachers, in what has to be a process of continuous improvement. So that's where we really put our main focus, is on the quality of the teaching.
Well, forgive me, it's been a while since I was in a classroom, so I don't even know what an interactive whiteboard is. And I also hear that you've developed a vocabulary app as well. Could you explain those?
We do, yes. I mean, I say we because it was nothing to do with me. It was some of my colleagues who conceptualized and designed, and we worked with a partner organisation, a technology company, and we put together this app because we see that people are spending an awful lot of time, memorising vocabulary that they might use once reproduce it in a test environment, and they'll forget it the next way. So what we tried to do is produce an app that is kind of interesting, it's quite fun to use, and will help people to really internalise the word. So looking at the grammar of the word, the pronunciation, how you use it in sentences, what other word it collocates, what's the sort of environment it lives in. And then sort of activities and games that will help people to really memorise. I say actually more than memorise, I mean internalise, so that they can actually, when the moment comes and they're looking for that word, they can say the word.
And I asked you a little bit about your own background, and you've studied many different things, but teaching is also one of your things.
I spent quite a few years teaching, yes.
Right, you've taught in Japan, Turkey, and Brazil, so
yes.
You know how Koreans and many people around the world are obsessed with learning English.
Yeah.
The tools, technology helps, but what's a very practical and easy tip that you can share with us on studying English? On
studying, I look at it. Yeah, I look at it less from the studying point of view, and I look at it more from the teaching point of view. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. But one of the things I always thought was a good idea to do as a teacher, and it's very simple and it sounds kind of boring, but was as a teacher what I used to do quite often would be to repeat a task. Because what you find is that the first time that students would try to do something, they get a bit, and let's say you give them an activity, a problem-solving activity or a role play, and I think the first time around they tend to concentrate on what the problem is and what the role play is, and it's difficult for them to do that and pay attention to the language at the same time. So by doing the task again and perhaps giving a bit of feedback in between, people have perhaps solved what you might call conceptual problems of how we deal with this situation. And the second time around it's say, well, this time let's really pay attention to what we're saying and are we choosing the right words. And when I first tried that I thought people would be a little bit cautious about it, but I'd read about this theory and read about how useful it could be, and I found that students really valued it. And that's what you can do in a classroom. You can provide this environment to allow people to try to have a little bit of space to try it a second time, if you like, because in the real world, not so many second chances.
Right.
So that was a really good thing to do.
If you apply that from students' point of view, then I guess, because one of the phrases or one of the complaints that I hear most of Koreans is they don't get a chance to speak English or really practice in a real life situation.
Yeah.
So this theory of practice and repetition is definitely needed in our classrooms.
You can do it. People can talk to each other. I mean, two people who are learning English. There's no reason why they can't do things together. The classroom is one environment. You have the extra resource there of the teacher. But we always say to people, practice outside class. If you're going to socialise with your friends outside class, if you're on social networks, whether it's with us or with anybody else, try and find as many occasions to use English for what it's meant for, to communicate with people. So don't necessarily sit at home writing out textbook exercises or something like that, but try and find something where you're interested in music, then join a music chat group or something like that. Say what you want. Don't worry about how you say it. That'll come over time. But just get involved in things that you like.
I think that's a great tip because the internet provides this door to
huge possibilities. Yeah.
Right. The British Council does a lot of work, not only in languages, but also arts and society. Can you introduce us to some of the programs? Like, for one, the Internationalizing higher education efforts. That's a mouthful, but what does that involve?
Internationalizing higher education. It's essentially looking at higher education and saying that in so many respects it is we can build a much richer higher educational environment by working across international borders. And of course this already happens a lot. Academics travel, they study, they research collaboratively with people all over the world. And what we're trying to do in that regard is take that process much further to accelerate it. And in particular in relation to UK and Korean universities, really build relationships so that they do more work together, they do more collaborative research, they might exchange their professors, their faculty, student exchanges, perhaps looking at joint degree programs, for example. So really building relationships between the two institutions, because Korea, very understandably, is very focused on the other direction, towards the US. But we find that there's a very strong interest in looking outside the US towards Europe and the UK in particular. We have some very strong universities in the UK. So I suppose we see ourselves as a little bit of a kind of a marriage broker. We make the introductions.
And one way is the council also offers scholarships for British students who want to come to Korea to study?
We don't actually offer scholarships.
No.
I wish we had the cash to do that, because that would help. What we do is try to promote opportunities in Korea to UK students through the networks of universities in the UK. Because as I said, earlier on, we want this flow of traffic, if you like, to go in both directions. So we want more Korean students to go to the UK, but we also want more UK students coming over here. And it's one of the great ways that you build cultural understanding exchange is through students moving around.
So both ways. How are you promoting studies in the UK? Like you say, many Korean students do tend to go to Canada or America or maybe even Australia. I think maybe it's notion you think that it's a bit more expensive maybe in the UK.
Yeah.
Also,
it's not.
The pronunciation they think maybe is a little bit harder to understand. What are the obstacles and how are you addressing that challenge?
I think distance is one thing. It does seem a long way. Cost shouldn't really be an issue. There is no, on balance, if you look at the fees charged in British universities compared to US universities, they're almost always cheaper. The other aspect of it is that university degrees in the UK are shorter. So a first degree would normally be 3 years as opposed to 4. And a master's degree is 1 year instead of 2, because of the way the programs are taught. It's more intensive. So in that respect, and I think the cost of living is not particularly high in the UK, especially if you live on a university campus and you take advantage of all of the discounts and the benefits and the cheap beer and everything else. So it's I don't think cost should be an issue, but you're right that there is that perception. So that's one of the things that we have to do is get over that perception. And we're running a cartoon series at the moment, a webtoon, and it's really about addressing some of these stereotypes. So it's about a young woman who goes to the UK and basically looking at how her preconceptions start to change, and she starts to understand a little bit more about what it's really like. Because the UK, bear in mind, is particularly in the universities, is very, very multicultural. The average across all universities is about 16% of all students are from outside the UK, and in some universities that might be up to 30%, 35%. So and the UK itself is quite a multicultural place.
Right. Some of the other programs, you have one for social entrepreneurs, young social entrepreneurs. Is that also open to Koreans?
Well, it is. I mean, we've been running programs for social entrepreneurs in Korea for the last 3 or 4 years. Most of our participants are from Korea. They're young people who have a great idea. They have some notion, some intent to do something good in society, whether it's to do with, very often it's to do with the environment. They're looking to do something beneficial there. But also they have they've got a sound business sense, that they think they can make this work and make this viable. The program we did recently, which was with an organisation called Intel, the very well-known technology company. They support us in this. We brought social entrepreneurs from around Asia to a camp in Korea, because just as much as we want to work with Korean social entrepreneurs, what we offer is that we can connect them with other social entrepreneurs. And it's an absolutely fabulous thing to do, is to get these people from different countries. We've had people from Vietnam, from Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, all around the region, and brought them here. And you see these people spark, and they've got brilliant ideas. And the way the networks they create, and the way that it empowers their thinking is absolutely fantastic. So we've had people from our programs go out and start businesses in Africa. We've had them all around Southeast Asia. So that it's a wonderful thing to see.
So you mainly provide them with a forum for them to network?
Not just
what
a
sort of
forum, no.
support?
We actually provide them with a fairly structured training program. So we bring out consultants from the UK who've worked in social enterprise, so they learn about the financing, they learn about how the marketing, the PR, the kind of structures that they can work in. We bring in Korean experts as well to support that.
And what are the requirements for maybe our viewers who want to take part in this program?
I think great, great ideas and motivation, and this desire to improve the way that we live, to make society a better place. That's what people bring. I mean, they're very idealistic people, but they've also got this kind of hard-headed business side to them as well, which it's a great combination. But no, anybody can join the programs.
What about English? Are English skills?
English helps, but it's not essential. Yeah.
The cultures of Korea and the UK, jumping to another topic, right? Do you find there are quite a lot of similarities? The UK being an island, we call it the island culture, and whereas Korea, of course, is a peninsula. Very different histories.
Yeah.
But now that you've been here for 4 years, do you discover more similarities as you go on, or actually?
I think, I suppose I'd perhaps have jumped beyond that and started to appreciate the, I think obviously this is a slightly bland statement, but people everywhere pretty much the same. Once you get below the surface a little bit. I can't really say that, the sort of striking similarities between Korean and British. And I think it's actually some of the differences which I think make it a really interesting combination, and particularly when we bring artists out to work in Korea with their Korean counterparts. There's a very different approaches to doing things, and that's quite a rich creative mix. We certainly find that people, when we put British people and Korean people together, they get on pretty well. So it's certainly there's no clash of cultures there, I don't think. But they're very different.
Is there a greater interest in Korea among the British people as well? Do you notice that?
I think there is, and the growing recognition of Korean pop music, that's made a big impression in the West. And people are starting now to kind of realise that these brands that they see in their everyday lives, they're making a connection, well, this is all about Korea as well. But we have a big job to do, I think, both people like the British Council and our Korean counterparts, to build the awareness of Korea in the UK. It's a faraway place. Geopolitical problems often overshadow what's going on in this part of the world, and that's very unfortunate. But I think gradually there's a greater recognition of what South Korea is, and its cultural offer, its position in the world as a trading nation, as a manufacturing nation.
Well, as part of those efforts, I think the British Council began a series of lectures on Korean and British cultures. And the first presenter was Andrew Salmon, who is a journalist and expert on Korea. Let's see what he has to say about our two cultures.
The Gwanghwamun Center of the British Council is located in Jongno-gu, Seoul. The people came for a special lecture about a Brit's perspective on Korea.
What we're doing is offering a lecture or a talk, which is, it's not so much about Korean history or about Britain. It's really about Britain and Korea, and in this case some shared history that we have. And in the future, that's what also we'll be doing, is looking at where we can find British people who've been in Korea maybe for a long time, but all of them have a very deep engagement with Korea, and getting them to talk about their experience in Korea.
The British Council began a series of lectures to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Council's opening and the 60th year of peace since the Korean War. The first speaker is Andrew Salmon, a journalist who writes about Korea. His topic, The Korean War from a British Man's Perspective, is based on his book, Scorched Earth, Black Snow.
Well, the Korean War was a very, very important war. It's forgotten now. There's not many great books or films about it, so it's kind of known as the Forgotten War. But it was the war, the first UN war. It was the first hot war of the Cold War. It was the war that made China a superpower. But it was also the first limited war, a war that didn't explode into a massive war. So these are all significant precedents for the future. Of course, its significance now is that it never really ended.
It was a chance to look back on Korean history, not from a political or military perspective, but through the eyes of soldiers from the UK and Australia, and through the experiences of civilian Koreans. Salmon also shared over 100 previously undisclosed photographs that gave us a fresh perspective on the war.
Some of the photographs were given to me by veterans. Many of them were taken by news photographers, because, of course, the early days of the Korean War was very, very big news. There was actually some very, very good news photographers in Korea at the time. So I've been collecting these images for 4 years now, so I've got several hundred online.
Andrew Salmon has a deep understanding and affection for Korea, born of years of living in Korea. The lecture series will continue with more people like him. But what about the audience? What did they think?
우리는 한국인 선생님 말로 그냥 그런 거 전쟁에 대한 얘기를 듣다가 외국인의 시선에서 외국인 입으로 직접 들으니까 색다른 경험이었어요.
I think the images were very powerful actually, and the stories about the children and the women left behind, and just how many times they thought it was over and it wasn't, and it just kept going on. So I think that was quite powerful in the talk.
It's nice to see Andrew Salmon. He's, of course, the host of another show here on Arirang TV, Bizline. Tell me about how this series of talks began.
Well, I have to give credit to one of my colleagues, one of our teachers, a guy called Mike McRitchie, and he basically came up to me one day and says, "Why don't we do some talks?" And it was as simple as that. Okay. So he had an idea that we, something that we can offer as an additional benefit for our, not just for our customers, but for other people who want to get to know UK or UK culture. But he had the idea that it would be good to do it with British people who'd been in Korea for perhaps some years, who understood the place well and had particular perspectives. So that would provide quite an interesting angle, and it certainly has. We started out with Andrew's talk last month, and he's, as you say, an expert on Korea, particularly the Korean War and the UK's involvement in the Korean War, and he's written several books about that. So that was a good place to start. This Friday we have another guy called Mike Breen, who's a journalist and author. Again, knows a lot about Korea. He's been here many, many years. So we're continuing in that kind of line.
So if the lectures are on Korea from a British perspective, the audience is intended to be British,
I think the audience last time was about 80% Korean. Yeah.
Are they maybe sometimes surprised by what the British talker, in this case only Andrew Salmon, of course, what he had to say about how the Brits or the British view Koreans?
Yeah, I think that was I mean, what Andrew did was a more, I suppose, a historical presentation. I think, so it wasn't so much the UK perspective on Korea, but it was certainly, I think, interesting for people and perhaps surprising how much the UK had been involved in that period of Korean's history, because it's often not so well remembered. So that was important. I think as we go on, then that aspect of a reflection on Korea by an outsider, I think will perhaps come more to the fore. And it's always an interesting thing to have when other people talk about your country. It's often surprising and interesting.
Right. And depending on your area of curiosity or expertise, I guess, you get very different takes.
Yeah.
For you personally, what would you say has been the most sort of interesting part about Korean culture? For one, our writer said that you're a big fan of kimchi. Is it Korean food, or what is it that interests you?
I think, well, to a certain extent, when you move to a country, and particularly one as distinct as Korea, it's the whole package. You know, it's the food, it's the culture, to an extent the if you like, the built environment, the architecture, the landscape. So it's all of that. But I think ultimately for me, living in somewhere is going to be always about the people, and that's been a kind of quite interesting process of understanding a little bit more about the Korean temperament, the Korean way of life, the Korean culture. And I suppose one little anecdote that might illustrate how I got used to that was, or how I understood something about Korea was, I think about a week after arriving, I was in a park with my kids, and this rather angry-looking guy came up to my kids, and I thought, well, I was a bit worried about what was going to happen. And he stuck his hand in his pocket, and out came the candies. And he was obviously a very nice, gentle man who was going to be kind to my kids. But what surprised me at the time was that none of this was in his facial expression. And so I talked to people about it, and people say, well, you know, older Korean men just don't smile. So you kind of, I think it's just it's a very small example, but something where you could misjudge a situation if you don't understand that. And you can ask, well, why do they not smile? And you'll hear stories and theories about why that's the case. But I suppose it just taught me at the time, as I should know anyway, that you don't rush to judgments about things, and there's often a little bit more behind what's going on if you take the time to inquire. And I think that in general, my I suppose observation of Korean people is that sometimes on the surface they can seem busy, preoccupied, in a rush. But what you have behind that is extraordinary warmth and sincerity. And when you do make friends with Korean people, they are absolutely wonderful. I've made some fantastic friends here, and that's people say, what will you miss about Korea? It's a very simple answer. It's my friends. You know, I could probably buy kimchi somewhere else, and I can. Won't
be the same, though.
Won't
you
be
know
the same,
that, right?
maybe, but I think the friends I've made here, and the colleagues as well, have made the time here really worthwhile.
I actually lived in the UK for about 2.5 years when I was very young. But what you just said about the Koreans is quite similar to what I experienced about the British people. When I first went, I thought they're a little bit hard to get to know, and they have quite conservative demeanors. They're not, their emotions, they don't wear their emotions on their sleeves, like,
well, you're perhaps a better cultural observer than I am, I think.
But again, I found, it took me a while too. My friends in school, I found them to be very, very warm inside, and once we became friends, long time friends.
Well, maybe it is then, you know, you asked me earlier about a similarity between UK and British, and maybe there is that immediate reserve, and then behind that often a lot more warmth.
So probably some of the words, the key words that come to mind first when you say the UK is, like we said, Shakespeare, and of course football, not soccer, as you call it, football, yes. I don't know how you can define a culture that is so crazy about Shakespeare and also football. How would you describe the British culture in one sentence, if you could try?
It is extremely rich, it's diverse. We have, I think, quite now quite a progressive society, but at the same time it's built on these very, very long traditions, and I think that makes it interesting and unique.
Again, in that way, maybe quite similar to Korea, but trying very hard, of course, to... is it the old customs and the old traditions, is there ever a danger that the youth of the UK are sort of losing their, not respect, but for that? But
yeah. Well, I think undoubtedly, but I don't think culture has ever been anything other than dynamic, and the UK is no exception to that. But on the other hand, I suppose that we do sometimes find ways of bringing what some of the older aspects of our culture, the more traditional aspects, of giving them new resonance within our contemporary culture. And I don't worry about Shakespeare at all. I mean, Shakespeare's been around for a very, very long time. It's constantly being reinterpreted, being reinvented. And whether it's through cartoons or whatever else, you know, it's movies. Shakespeare's not going away, and I think that's also true of other aspects of our culture. But I don't think we should get too hung up on the idea of heritage. That there are very fixed points in our history that we have to try and cling on to. That's not a good thing to do.
Let's move on to a very famous festival, of course, the Edinburgh International Festival. It's held every year. Huge history of supporting performing arts. What is the theme of this year's festival?
This year it's about art and technology. So if you look at a lot of the performances, the acts, and what you might call the wraparound of the festival is very much on the theme of technology, and which is why one of the centerpieces of the exhibition from a Korean perspective this year will be the Namjoon Park, or Park Namjoon. And there's an exhibition of his work in Edinburgh, the Talbot Rice Gallery. But not just an exhibition, there's also, I think there's a series of talks, seminars. Apparently it's the 50th year since his first solo exhibition, so again another cause for celebration. And you know, he's an incredibly interesting artist, and you look at the combination of art and technology, and you know, he was a pioneer in that respect. And there are also contemporary Korean artists. There's an organisation called YMAP, and it's a mixture of digital art, video, music, quite sort of interesting, and dance, so quite innovative. So we'll see something of, I can't say traditional Korea, because Namjoon Park was never traditional, but you'll also see some contemporary performance as well.
Okay. Did the British Council have any part in bringing this exhibition?
We did. I mean, in the sense that we as we often do, our role is as, if you like, a kind of broker. It's getting people together, and both UK and Korean organisations will often contact us and say, we've got an idea, and how can we take it forward?
Okay, well, sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking to Mr. Roland Davies, Director of the British Council in Korea, and we'll be right back after this.
Seoul itself has become, by degrees, more cosmopolitan. The quality of life is, in some ways, has improved. I think people are paying more attention to the way the city's designed, and you know, it's kept moving. I still think that it's a relatively pressurised. That hasn't gone away. I think it's changed shape, but not quite gone away.
Your job, of course, as Director of the British Council in Korea, but also just working with the British Council, is to share British culture with the world.
Yeah.
But you said that your work also helps the UK. In which way?
I think if we focus down on what the core purpose of our organisation is, which is to build trust. And I think across many areas of life, trust is such an essential component of getting along in the world. Mm-hmm. So whether it's building trust between young people, between people who are doing business, people in education, the benefit to the UK we see is it's very important for any country to be, if you like, well regarded by other countries. So if you're working in the sphere of politics and people have a better understanding of who we are as a country and what our intentions are, and if you're working in business and you have a connection with the UK, and that's enormously valuable if you have that sense of trust that you would have the UK in mind. You'd be very willing to, it's a place that you think, well, I can do business here, I know these people. So I think in all walks of life, the building of trust is very, very important. In such an interconnected world, it's an essential component, I think, of international relations at every level, whether that's government to government or people to people.
Okay. And last question. The British Council has evolved over the years, of course. Mm-hmm. How would you like to see it evolve, maybe in the next 10, 20? Do you see it changing its business model?
I think we have never and will never lose sight of what it is we're trying to do. I mean, our basic goal of working across arts and English language, across education and society, and this goal of building trust and having that kind of impact is not going to change. What we do have to recognise is that the environment around us is changing. And so in terms of how we operate, we have to pay much more attention to digital. We have to be very active in that sphere and how we reach people. And in terms of if you like, the finances, then less reliance on government money, and we have to be more entrepreneurial. So as an organisation, we are very ambitious in how we can increase our reach, how we can be a bigger and stronger organisation, do more cultural relations, which we think is a really good thing to do, and we need to find different ways of doing that.
Are there still more countries or areas where you're looking to expand into? I think
I can't think of many places where we're not looking to actually grow what we do, because we have a very strong belief in the value of what we do, and we have an enormous body of evidence to show that people like what we do and appreciate what we do and want to become involved in our programs and our activities.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with your work with the British Council, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And that was our interview with Mr. Roland Davies, Director of the British Council in Korea. Thank you for joining us, and join us next time on Heart to Heart. You can re-watch a program on arirangtv.com. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.